Welcome back to the channel, guys. So, maybe like a month ago, I reacted to Denzel Washington and Larry Elder on the truth about race. And a lot of you guys commented and told me to Kendel react to Larry Elder and Morgan Freeman. So with that said, here we are. Let's get into it.
As for Black History Month, I'm not a fan. I'm with actor Morgan Freeman on this one.
Black History Month you find
ridiculous.
why?
You're going to relegate my history to a month?
Oh, come on.
What do you do with yours? Which month is White History Month? No, come on, tell me.
Well, I'm Jewish.
Okay, which month is Jewish History Month?
There isn't one.
Oh, why not?
Yeah.
Do you want one?
No.
I don't either.
Oh.
I don't want a Black History Month. Black history is American history.
Now, maybe Black History Month wouldn't be
Short and plain answer. I told you, sometimes, to be honest with you, I don't know how many of you guys feel that way. To me, it feels like they give us that out of pity. Maybe they're like, oh, we tired of you guys complaining. Here you go. Here's something. That's what it felt like to me, honestly. I don't celebrate it at all whatsoever. It feels like it's given to you out of pity and to feel bad for us. And that's want to give you something out of pity. Don't take it. Trust me. I totally agree. How come nobody else has that month? I told so.
bad if they actually taught Black history. Here are a few things that blacks are misled about: slavery, gun control, and the minimum wage. First, slavery. Now, when I studied slavery in high school, I assumed, the way a lot of people do, that slavery was something that just happened to black people in Africa.
One of the sad things is that we talk in this country as if slavery was something unique to the United States or to blacks and whites. And in point of fact, slavery was one of the oldest institutions among human beings. They go back as far as there is recorded history. And in every single part of the world, Polynesians enslaved other Polynesians. For most of history, people enslaved people who were the same race as themselves for the simple reason that they simply didn't have the resources to go to another continent and take people from another continent and move them en masse someplace else.
Now, slavery could not have happened without the complicity of African chieftains who sold Africans not just to European slavers, but to Muslim slavers as well.
Thanks to you guys, a lot of you guys have put me on to Thomas Sowell. And because of Thomas Sowell, that's when I found out the truth about slavery and different races that were enslaved. And like, I knew about Africa selling their own people. I knew, but I was younger when I heard the rumors, but I never took the time to, when you're young. And as I got older, I started looking, when you guys were telling me, and I was like, what? I started looking into it, and it was true. That's when I got put onto Thomas Sowell, and I have like about at least 9-10 videos on Thomas Sowell, and the way he broke it down, trust me, a lot of black Americans need to watch that and listen to it. We were never taught this in school. All we heard us about was Kunta Kinte, and they never went in depth into how slavery actually started. I never had, nope, not even once. And I saw some people comment and said, in the UK, they learned about it. Not over here in New York. I had no idea about none of this.
But when white captains came offering manufactured goods, weapons, and rum for slaves, African kings and merchants had little reason to hesitate. They viewed the people they sold not as fellow Africans, but criminals, debtors, or prisoners of war from rival tribes.
Yep.
By selling them, kings enriched their own realms and strengthened them against neighboring enemies. African kingdoms prospered from the slave trade, but meeting the Europeans' massive demand created intense competition. Slavery replaced other criminal sentences, and capturing slaves became a motivation for war rather than its result. To defend themselves from slave raids, neighboring kingdoms needed European firearms, which they also bought with slaves. The slave trade had become an arms race, altering societies and economies across the continent.
Did you know that Muslim slavers took more blacks out of Africa than did European slavers? The Muslim slave trade began centuries earlier and continued long after the European slave trade ended.
Yes, I also learned that from Thomas Sowell. The Muslim slave trade was brutal. I don't know if it was more brutal than how Americans that were slaves in America were treated, but the Muslims, how they treated black slaves was horrific. The details when Thomas Sowell was explaining, you guys gotta go check that out. I'm gonna leave the link to it in my description. You guys gotta go check that out. It is so deep. And when I watch Black Americans go over there and celebrating, I don't think they know. I'm not too sure. That's one thing I would love to find out. If you guys know, let me know. Let me know in the comments. Though a lot of these American, I also see rappers going over there and they're wearing the whole Muslim stuff. And I'm not sure if they know about the history. We all know what it's the past. I'm not sure what it's like now. I haven't heard anything about it. But you guys let me know in the comments.
Slavery, yes, during the 9th up to the 13th century, slavery was still very much an Islamic phenomenon as compared to the West. Of course, there was ancient slavery in many other societies, but in terms of chattel slavery, in terms of slavery as an institution, that was profitable. That was very much still an Arab Islamic preserve until the West came in sometime from the 15th, 16th century onwards.
Just how extensive was this Arab Muslim slave trade of Africans?
Slavery was a very important part of Islamic expansion in West Africa, and in fact in the Sudan, and from the very earliest period of Islamic penetration into Africa. It started by buying, purchasing slaves and trading in slaves, and then it went on from purchasing to raiding for slaves and capturing slaves deliberately, especially mainly black Africans, and transporting them into North Africa and into Saudi Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula, and onwards to the Ottoman Empire to Turkey. So slavery was a very endemic part of Islamic interaction with Africa. And in West Africa, the jihad's period of the 18th and 19th century involved massive slave raiding and slave trading.
Wow,
and many of the slaves that were captured and sent and sold and taken into the transatlantic slave trade, most of those who were doing the raiding at the time were Muslim communities because they were the dominant tribes. So a lot of that happened. That is not to say that non-Muslim communities were involved in raiding, but the dominant tribes were the Muslim communities that were doing the raiding at the time.
Now, I've heard that Muslims...
And I heard I forget who I heard said that. I forget his name. But he was saying the same thing. Like, he's all for the reparations. You understand the reparations. But what he said was, we should ask for reparations from Africa. They're the ones that gave us up. So why ain't Black Americans asking Africa for reparations first? They were the ones that sold our ancestors to cross the world. But you want reparations? For what? What have you been through that you want reparations from? I'm not for it, trust me. I'm glad to have the opportunity that I had throughout my life and to have the opportunity that I have right now and the success that I have right now. I'm not all the way up there, but you know, I'm on that path. And so far, no one has yet to hold me back. So if you want reparations, like this, I forget who his name is, I apologize, but we should start from Africa first. Let me know what you guys think about that in the comments.
Slavers and Muslim slave owners treated slaves better than did European slavers and European and American slave owners. But is that true?
One of the themes I explored in my book is this perception that Muslims treated their slaves much more humanely than the Western slave trade.
That's not true.
And what I found out in my own research was that that is not necessarily the case, and that there were very harsh treatments of slaves by Muslim groups. It was just a done deal at the time. And one of the key differences I looked at in my book that whereas slaves taken to the West were able to marry and reproduce and have their families, and you can still find large populations of African Americans today in North America and in the Caribbean, you go to the Islamic world and you find very few black remnants of the slave trade, which was very massive. And one of the reasons is that many of the male black slaves taken into the Islamic world were castrated as eunuchs, which meant that they could not, of course, reproduce. And the other factor is that many of the women were taken as concubines by their slave masters, and they gave birth to mixed races, and they were very much absorbed into the society. So you don't have black slave kind of descendants in the Muslim world as you would in North America. And part of the reason is the castration and the way the slaves were treated.
Now, slavery...
So it seems like to me, it's like, just like how you was explaining, when they took the black male slaves and castrate them, and to do more horrific things to them in front of their own lady, take their ladies and to have mixed race babies, right? So it seems like to me that the hatred amongst each other in the black community, it goes deeper than what a lot of people think it is. Okay, see how it's starting off with, they already had that tension already. And the way some, not all of them, but a lot of black women, how they treat, well, the men now, it's like you have to be a thug, you have to be a gangster, you have to be a drug dealer, you see? But when they get somebody that's white or mixed, they don't have to be them things. I don't understand that. You see what's going on there? Maybe that's why there's a lot of black Americans want to be this thug, this super gangster, try to impress the ladies. But the man that's not black or mixed, he don't have to do those things to try to impress this lady. I don't get why is that. Because look at Eve, right? Who was with D Block? I'm not sure if you guys know who she is. Well, a lot of people in the black community should know. Eve, she's married, settled down, she has a white husband. Nice hair. You were sworn she never was a rapper. If you see her now, you would never thought she was a rapper. But you see, but when she wasn't with a white man, she wanted that thug, that gangster. See what I'm going? So and I think that's why a lot of black men thinking that they have to be that, but you don't. But it's only getting worse.
Ended in the West, in America, not until after the Civil War. But what about the Arab Muslim slave trade? When did it end? In fact, has it ended?
Slavery persisted in Islamic countries far, far longer than it did in the West. The West abolished slavery long before the Islamic countries ever abolished slavery. And they did so under a lot of pressure from colonial governments and from Western governments and from all kinds of activist groups. And in fact, the Saudi Arabia, for instance, abolished slavery in 1961 or 1960 thereabout, whereas Mauritania abolished slavery in 1981. And these were done on paper, and a lot of it is still being done. In practice, there are still a lot of slaves in Muslim countries. And the Sudan, during the Civil War, there was a lot of slave raiding going on done by the Arab Muslims in the north against the enemies and the Christian Africans in the south. So even up to the 90s and this century, there was still capturing of young African men, boys in the Sudan for sale. So slavery continues, even though it has been abolished on paper in many Muslim countries.
It still continues. Wow.
Now gun control.
That's why a lot of black Americans, they need to go and listen to guys like that, and also guys like Thomas Sowell. You have to go back. You before he gets canceled. I hope not. But you got to go back and learn the true history of how slavery actually started and where it actually came from. Stop thinking that it only happened in America. No, it didn't. It didn't start here. And no, Americans didn't go over there and just took slaves. It didn't work that way. It was trading. They were trading Africans for goods, guns, supplies, and etc. You see where I'm going. So you have to go back and do your research, just like I had to. And too bad it took me almost 30 years to have to find all of this out.
Control. Liberals, especially those living in the inner city where crime is high, often demand further gun control legislation.
Mm-hmm.
We fought a good fight earlier this year, but we came up short. And that means we've got to get back up and go back at it, because as long as there are those who fight to make it as easy as possible for dangerous people to get their hands on gun, then we've got to work as hard as possible for the sake of our children. We've got to be ones who are willing to do more work to make it harder.
Are black students taught that the gun control movement began in this country as a means to make sure newly freed black slaves did not get their hands on guns?
Just like Obama. Great talker. But Actually doing the work is a whole different thing, which he didn't do.
In the most infamous Supreme Court decision ever, Dred Scott, the Supreme Court Justice Roger Taney said, if blacks are anything other than chattel property, why, they may be able to get their hands on guns.
It was a horrible, racist Southern Democrat judge named Roger Taney, and he determined that Dred Scott could not count for more than 3/5 of a person. Why? Because Dred Scott couldn't have a firearm. In fact, Judge Taney later noted, and this is in a chapter in my first book, Hands Off My Gun, that in order for him to give Dred Scott full citizenship and count him as an actual law-abiding American, that meant that Dred Scott would have the, quote, full liberty to have and to bear arms. And Judge Taney couldn't have that.
Next, Democrats love them some minimum wage, don't they?
Tom Steyer wants a higher minimum wage. The billionaire says that he would propose paying workers at least $22 an hour if he wins the White House. Steyer floated the idea yesterday during a campaign stop in South Carolina.
Now, during Black History Month, our black students taught that the minimum wage movement in this country began as a means to make sure that blacks who are willing to work for less did not take jobs away from whites who are unwilling to work for less. By the 1960s, many African Americans were employed as farmers. This changed in 1967 when the government extended the minimum wage laws to American farmers as part of the war on poverty. Black farmers who were accustomed to making a modest $3.50 per day were now legally required to be paid $1 per hour, a tremendous increase in wages. The effect of this law was immediate and undeniable. An estimated 25,000 farm workers were put out of work in the Mississippi Delta alone. Black farmers were not oblivious to the cause and effect. That dollar an hour ain't worth nothing, said the wife of one day laborer. It would have been better if it had been 50 cents a day if you work every day. 50 cents per day, of course, was a lower wage than what her husband would have been earning prior to the law. Her point was clear. The federal minimum wage law destroyed their ability to earn a living. End of quote.
The first minimum wage law in our country was the Davis-Bacon Act of 1931. And the Davis-Bacon Act says that all workers in federally funded or federally assisted construction projects must be paid the prevailing wage. And if you look on page 6513 of the Congressional Record on March 31st, 1931, you'll see congressional testimony where congressmen will say, see that contractor over there? He brings cheap colored labor up from the South, puts them in cabins, and it's labor of that sort that has to compete, that white Americans are competing against.
The only tricky thing about raising the minimum wage, we all know what happens. It puts you in a different tax bracket. I noticed that in my paycheck when we get time and a half, and once you go over that overtime, your taxes, you're in a different bracket. They don't tell you that. You thinking of something good, and then prices starts to slowly raise. Stuff that was, let's say it was like $2.99. Now it's like $3.29. See? Somehow something got to give eventually. Something's going to have to. It doesn't like a business. That's not going to raise. They're going to start cutting hours. They're going to start cutting the manpower. That means you're going to have to do more work. No, it all sounds good.
One of the things that my friends on the left think is just grand is the minimum wage. And 100 years ago, the minimum wage came into being in the United States, state by state. And its declared purpose was to keep immigrants, women, blacks, and Chicanos out of the labor force, to drive them out entirely. Newspaper editorials, the economics profession, they all said, oh boy, this is good for the Anglo-Saxon race.
Thus, the consequences of minimum wage rates have
been almost
wholly bad, to increase unemployment and to increase poverty. Moreover, the effects have been concentrated on the groups that the do-gooders would most like to help. The people who have been hurt most by minimum wage laws are the blacks. I have often said that the most anti-Negro law on the books of this land is the minimum wage rate.
I'm Larry Elder, and we've got a country to save. I'll see you next time.
That was very insightful. Shout out to Larry Elder, man. You guys want to go check out the video, the link is going to be in the description. But hey, I still don't understand, like, why do a lot of Black Americans go over to the Islamic and you see them wearing the robes and all that type of stuff. Like, what are you representing, really? I understand the past might be the past, but still, I will feel some type of way. Because if you're over here complaining about white America, but you're over there in the Islamic country, when they were also involved in the slave trade of Black Africans, it's confusing to me. Because you should be just as mad at them as you're mad at the white Americans. I think you should be. But then again, a lot of them don't even know the true history of slavery, just like how I did. Or they're too scared to actually do the research and find out the truth for themselves. Some people would rather you lie to them than you tell them the truth, just to make them feel good inside. Because the truth hurts. We all know that the truth does hurt. But then again, it's facts over feelings. I personally rather have the facts. As I get older now, I'd rather have the facts. That to be knowing that I've been lied to my whole life. Because in school, we was never taught none of this. We was only taught about Kunta Kinte, the slave that kept on running away, and then to take his legs off. That's what we learned. And the cutting fields, the in-depth as how the slave trade was run and where it started, we never, I can't remember. I mean, we were never taught that. They cut that out the history books. And thanks to guys like Thomas Sowell and Larry Elder and these guys, you learn the truth about it. And it's scary. And I'll leave you guys with this. I still understand in the Black community why we still fighting amongst each other. And as soon as something happened, we're quick to say the white man. But we're still fighting amongst each other. We will not hesitate to take another Black man's life. Not even not one hesitation. But as soon as the police comes, you put your guns down, you put your hands up. Not all of them, but at least 95% of them put their guns down, hands up. You surrender it? But you were just saying the white man was holding us back, holding us down. See, I don't understand it. I don't know where all this hate comes from in the Black community towards each other. Instead of us working together, it's like we're always jealous of another successful Black man. Like you watch PNB Rock, you watch XXXTentacion. Who did they get killed by? Another Black man. PNB Rock. The Black father drove his son to the restaurant. Told his son, go in there to do what you gotta do. The son went in there. PNB Rock wouldn't give up all the jewelry. Young man shot him. You just ruined your life and your son's life. Your own son. That's your son. Like, where does this jealousy come from? There's poor white people. There's rich white people. But you don't see them doing that to each other. And not at this rate that we've seen in the Black community. I don't get it. I hope you see a change, but we have to start taking accountability. We have to start there first. Being accountable of the things that's going on and taking responsibility for our own actions, that's where we start. Otherwise, there's no saving it. It's only going to get worse. And it is getting worse. You see what happened with Pop Smoke, too. Young Black men. They were aged 14 and 15 and 16 when they to rob him. How much did they get for the Rolex? $2,000. Are you serious? They just ruined their whole life for $2,000? You take somebody's son's life for $2,000. You see where this is going? I hope we see some type of change soon, but like I said, we got to take accountability. We got to be responsible for our own actions and the things that we do in the Black community. It's sad, and I only see it getting worse. It's only getting worse. What is so just got murdered recently was BTB Savage. It's never ending, man. But give me you guys think about this in the comments. And New York gun laws is ridiculous. New York, some laws in New York is just ridiculous. It's like they're giving the criminals. It's like the criminals are not the victims, and the victims are the criminals. That's the way it seems like in New York. I just saw recently some guy had defended himself against another guy who was trying to rob him. The guy got hurt. He got hurt, got stabbed multiple times, but he survived. I don't think the other guy survived, and they're trying to charge him. What? He had to defend himself. So you tell me you can't defend yourself? This is unreal. It's unreal. I don't know what's going on with the government that we have. It's just, it's sad that you can't even defend your own life. It's pathetic. But hey, until then, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'll see you guys later. Peace out. You guys have a blessed day.